late morning of March 31st, 1986, Rebecca Wendt was sunbathing outside her apartment complex in Panama City. At the same time, Darryl Barwick was lurking around the premises, watching her as he passed by several times. Michael Ann Wendt left her apartment in Panama City to travel to Fort Walton Beach. Rebecca Wendt, Michael Ann's sister and roommate, remained at the apartment complex and lay outside sunbathing until approximately 11:45 am. Another resident of the complex who was also outside sunbathing observed a man walking around the complex at about 12:30 p.m. The witness indicated that she saw the man walk toward the Wendt's apartment and later walk from the Wendt's apartment into the woods. She subsequently identified that man as Darryl Barwick. On the evening of March 31st, Michael Ann returned to the apartment and found Rebecca's body in the bathroom wrapped in a comforter. Investigators called to the scene observed bloody footprints at various places throughout the apartment and bloody fingerprints on the victim's purse and wallet. Rebecca's bathing suit had been displaced, and she had been stabbed numerous times. An autopsy revealed that she sustained 37 stab injuries on her upper body as well as a number of defensive wounds on her hands. The medical examiner concluded that the potentially life-threatening wounds were those to the neck, chest, and abdomen, and that death would have occurred within 3 to 10 minutes of the first stab injury. The examiner found no evidence of sexual contact with the victim, but a crime laboratory analyst found a semen stain on the comforter wrapped around the victim's body. After conducting tests on the semen and Barwick's blood, the analyst determined that Barwick was within 2% of the population who could have left the stain. When initially questioned by investigators, Barwick denied any involvement in Rebecca's murder. However, following his arrest on April 15, 1986, he confessed to committing the crime. He said that after observing Rebecca sunbathing, he returned to his home, parked his car, got a knife from his house, and walked back to the apartment complex where he had previously observed Rebecca. After walking past her 3 times, he followed her into her apartment. Barwick claimed he only intended to steal something, but when Rebecca resisted, he lost control and stabbed her. According to Barwick, he continued to stab Rebecca as the two struggled and fell to the floor. Barwick was convicted of first-degree murder, armed burglary, attempted sexual battery, and armed robbery in November 1986. A jury sentenced him to death 2 months later by a 9-3 margin. The Florida Supreme Court overturned the conviction in 1989 due to prosecutorial misconduct. After a new trial, Barwick was convicted again in 1992 and sentenced to death a second time after a unanimous jury recommendation. Upon retrial, and represented by a different attorney, Barwick was again convicted as charged. The jury unanimously recommended that Barwick be sentenced to death. In following the jury's recommendation, the trial court found 6 aggravating circumstances and no mitigating circumstances. The trial court sentenced Barwick on the non-capital offenses to 2 life terms and 1 30-year term. A sister, Lovey Barwick, testified that there were 7 siblings in the family and Barwick was the youngest. Each of the children was physically abused by their father. Depending upon how angry their father was, punishment could include being slapped or receiving black eyes. It did not matter which child was in trouble. The siblings were equally abused. At school, the Barwick children would lie asked about how they had received the bruises that were observed. As far as Lovey Barwick could remember, the defendant did not skip school. No one contacted social services on their behalf. Their father also beat their mother. For a period of time, how long she did not remember, their father left the family to be with another woman. During cross-examination, Lovey Barwick testified that she felt her brother Glenn was bitten as much as the defendant, that no other siblings had been charged with murder, and that the good times were about equal to the bad times. Barwick's mother, Ima Jean Barwick, testified that Barwick grew up in a violent home, where the violence was directed at both her and the children. She stayed with the defendant's father because she believed keeping the family together was the right thing to do. She testified that her husband did not drink in front of her and she did not believe he drank, but his anger flared up when least expected and was instantaneous. She did not remember any of her sons having to be treated by a doctor as the result of the beatings. She did think, though, that she had heard something about a shotgun incident. Barwick's father, Ira Barwick, testified, admitting he beat his children with anything within his reach, including 2x4s and metal rebar. He also admitted that during one of his rages, he hit Barwick's brother with a shovel. During another violent episode, Barwick was knocked unconscious. Barwick's father testified that he did not think there was anything wrong with how he disciplined his children. He treated his sons the same between them. He testified that he drank occasionally, and he hit his sons whether he was drinking or not. On cross-examination, he testified that Barwick was working for him at least part-time in 1986. None of their testimonies helped Barwick get out of death row. Darryl Bryan BARWICK spent more than 3 decades on Florida's death row. Barwick was executed on May 3, 2023. His last words were, "It's time to apologize to the victim's family, to my family. I can't explain why I did what I did," Barwick said before he was injected with a lethal 3-drug cocktail at 6:02 p.m. The victim's family did not attend the execution, and none of Barwick's family or friends were in attendance. Barwick's attorneys had appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court and asked for a stay of execution, citing the state's failure to give him a fair chance at clemency. The Supreme Court denied that final appeal. Barwick had his last meal at 9:15 a.m. He chose fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, black-eyed peas and cornbread. His drink of choice was a Coca-Cola. Darryl Bryan BARWICK was 56 years at the time of his execution. Thank you for watching Death Row.